All right, so we're back and ready for another deep dive.
Ready to go.
This time, we're looking at something that's been causing a lot of buzz in the U.S. House. Um, Bathroom access for transgender individuals.
Yeah, it's been pretty much unavoidable, especially with the new Congress.
Right, like it's everywhere you look.
Ah,
So we found this article from BuzzFeed News, and it's called AOC's one-tweet takedown of Nancy Mace's transgender bathroom issue is going viral. Catchy title, right?
definitely grabs your attention.
So this whole thing is basically about this public back and forth between two Congresswomen, Nancy Mace and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Republican from South Carolina, Democrat from New York.
Yeah, I think most people are pretty familiar with them by now.
Well, Mace has been pretty out there about keeping transgender women out of women's restrooms.
Yeah, and she's been very vocal about it. Like, Newsweek even reported she tweeted about bathrooms, like, over 300 times in just a few days.
Wow, okay, that's a lot of tweets.
It is, so it makes you wonder what her strategy is here.
Right, like what's she trying to do?
Well, it seems like she's using a pretty common tactic in politics. Appealing to fear.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, she's really framing this as a safety issue, saying things like, this is about protecting women and girls, and, really hammering on the idea of biological sex, the sex you're assigned at birth.
And so she's playing on people's anxieties about, like, who's using what bathroom.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it seems to be working, right? I mean, she's got the support of Mike Johnson now, the new Speaker of the House.
Right, and he's on record saying that, like, all those single-sex bathrooms at the Capitol, those should only be for people who match their biological sex.
It makes you wonder what's going to happen if this whole thing turns into actual laws.
Yeah, I mean, appealing to fear, it can be really powerful for getting people on your side, but it also tends to oversimplify things,
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't leave much room for actually understanding a complex issue.
Well, when people get scared, they don't really stop and think critically or put themselves in other people's shoes.
Exactly. So while Mace is really focused on this biological sex argument, AOC is taking a totally different approach.
Right. She's saying this isn't just about cisgender women, it's about safety for all women and girls.
Mm-hmm.
But how does that even work? Like, how could enforcing these biological sex roles actually make things less safe?
Well, that's the interesting part of AOC's argument.
Mm-hmm.
She says that if you try to enforce rules like that, you're actually going to end up with more harassment and potentially, like, even assault.
So why is that?
Well, because people are going to start policing who looks feminine enough to be using the women's restroom.
So anyone could just get questioned or challenged just because of how they look.
Right, especially, transgender individuals, people who maybe don't fit those traditional ideas of what a woman or a man should look like.
Especially if they're still transitioning too, right?
Yeah, imagine that, constantly having to prove your gender just to use the bathroom. It's a pretty scary thought.
Yeah. And this is what led to that really powerful quote from AOC, where she says that women could actually be forced to, quote, drop tro in front of an investigator.
Yikes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty strong image.
It is, and it really highlights how absurd this could get and how much potential there is for abuse.
Like, just think about it. Who's going to do all this checking? What rules are they going to use? How are they going to make sure nobody is, harassed or discriminated against?
Yeah, it's just a mess waiting to happen. And AOC is very clear about that. She's basically accusing Republicans of trying to bully women who don't fit their idea of what a woman should be.
She actually said, and I'm quoting here, if a woman doesn't look woman enough to a Republican, they want to be able to inspect her genitals to use a bathroom.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she's not holding back.
Not at all. But, it points to a deeper issue, like this fear of anything that challenges the traditional idea of what it means to be male or female.
Right, like this whole bathroom battle is just scratching the surface.
Yeah, we need to look at the bigger picture here, like what's going on culturally and politically.
Absolutely. But before we do that, let's talk about how both Mace and AOC are using social media in all of this, especially with their arguments.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how they're both using social media, especially Twitter. It's like their whole strategies are different, but they both kind of show how powerful online spaces can be, but also how tricky they can be.
Yeah, it's like watching a game of chess, but it's all happening out in the open. So, like, what are the differences in how they're using it?
Well, Mace is basically using it to get her message out there and get her supporters fired up.
Yeah.
Like all those tweets about biological sex and safety, they're meant for a certain group of people, to like reinforce what they already believe.
So she's creating this echo chamber where her position just keeps getting stronger and stronger.
That's a good way to put it. And she's also not afraid to use those tweets to, attack her opponents and even raise money, especially when people criticize her. Remember that tweet where she was like, socialist attacks me, calls me disgusting, and fundraises off it? Now I'm trending.
Yeah, like she's turning the whole thing around and using it to her advantage.
Exactly. It's pretty smart, politically speaking. Like, she makes herself look like the victim of, these attacks from the left, and then her supporters rally around her. She becomes this defender of, traditional values.
But then you have AOC using social media to like counter that whole narrative and offer this totally different perspective.
Right. And she seems to be trying to reach a wider audience, to get people thinking about it in a more complex way.
Yeah, and she's had some success with that. Like, remember that video she posted responding to Mace, where she said those bathroom rules would actually put all women at risk? Millions of people watched that.
It definitely got people's attention. Yeah. So you can see how she's using social media to reach more people and, like, challenge that fear-mongering.
Yeah.
To show the potential harm these policies could cause.
And remember that tweet where she was, like, making fun of how the GOP went from being all about small government to wanting to inspect the genitals of women and girls just to let them use the bathroom? That went viral.
Yeah, that one really hit a nerve. It seems like she's more about using humor and, really sharp criticism to kind of expose what she sees as hypocrisy and, what her opponent's saying.
It's definitely a different approach, but it seems to be working. People are paying attention and talking about it.
It is effective. But, the thing about these short little messages, even when they're funny or make you think, is that,
why?
Well, they don't really let you get into the complexity of things.
Yeah.
Like, it's hard to have a real deep conversation in 280 characters or a short video clip.
Right. It's all very simplified. And it feels like it just makes people react emotionally instead of really thinking things through.
Exactly. Social media is great for raising awareness, but it can also make people even more divided. And that makes it even harder to find common ground.
So while all these online battles are raging, let's not forget about the real-world impact all of this could have. These biological sex bathroom rules. How would they even put something like that into practice?
That's a good question. And it's something people don't really talk about that much. Like, practically speaking, how would you even enforce a rule like that? It'd be incredibly difficult and expensive, probably involve some kind of ID checks or even physical inspections.
Whoa, wait, are you serious? Like, having to show your ID every time you need to use the bathroom? That's crazy.
Yeah, talk about invasive and discriminatory. And, like, who would even be in charge of doing all this checking? Police, school staff, people working at stores. It boggles the mind.
And think about all the potential for people to abuse that power. Targeting people and harassing them just because of how they look.
Exactly. And legally speaking, it'd be a nightmare. People could argue that it violates all sorts of rights, like protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, and laws against discrimination based on sex and gender identity.
So it sounds like trying to push for these rules could actually blow up in their faces.
It's definitely a possibility. And we can't forget that policies have real-world consequences for people's lives.
It makes you think, right? Like, we're talking about bathrooms, but it feels like this whole thing is connected to something much bigger, like a deep-seated anxiety about gender and identity.
You're hitting the nail on the head there. This debate is just one small part of a much larger shift that's happening in our culture. There's this growing movement for transgender rights and recognition, and that challenges the traditional ideas about gender.
And for some people, that's really unsettling.
It is. It's like their whole understanding of the world is being turned upside down. And those feelings are valid. Change can be scary.
Yeah, but change can also be a chance to grow and learn.
Absolutely. So how do we move forward in a way that respects everyone, even with all these different opinions and fears?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, it really feels like we're stuck,
Yeah.
Like fear and misunderstanding are just driving everything.
So how do we get past that? Like, how do we make space for more empathy, for actually understanding each other?
Well, maybe instead of getting all hung up on these labels like biological sex, we could shift the focus,
Yeah.
Like talk about what we all actually want.
Okay, so what are we all looking for?
I think deep down, we all want the same thing: safe spaces. Spaces that are accessible and inclusive, for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's something most people could agree on, right? Like, no matter what your politics are or what you think about gender identity.
Exactly. And that means we need to get creative, really work together to find solutions.
So instead of just saying, nope, transgender people can't use the bathroom that matches their gender identity, we should be asking, how can we make sure everyone feels safe? And comfortable?
Right. And that might mean thinking outside the box. Like some schools and businesses are trying out these all-gender restrooms so anybody can use them, no matter what their gender identity is.
I like that. It's about finding a way to accommodate everyone, right, without excluding anybody.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just the physical space. It's about creating a culture of respect, you know? And that starts with education. The more we learn about what it means to be transgender, the more we challenge our own biases.
It's about opening our minds, really seeing the humanity in everyone.
And it's about having the guts to speak up,
Right.
you know, when we see injustice, when someone's being discriminated against. Because if we stay silent, we're kind of part of the problem.
That brings us back to social media, right? Like we talked about how it can be this echo chamber of negativity, but it can also be a tool for like teaching people and fighting for what's right.
For sure. Social media gives a voice to people who are often ignored. It challenges harmful stereotypes. And it can even help people find support, connect with others who understand what they're going through.
So it's about using it in a good way, right? Recognizing how powerful it can be, but also the harm it can cause.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, I think most people want to do the right thing. They want to live in a world that's fair, but sometimes they just need the right information, a little guidance.
Well, this has been amazing. We've really covered a lot. The politics, the anxieties people are feeling, even some possible solutions. It's clear that this isn't a simple issue and there's no easy fix.
For sure. It's not just us versus them. There are so many different opinions and experiences, and finding a way forward means being empathetic, open-minded, willing to challenge what we think we know.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a little something to think about. What's one small thing you can do today in your own community to promote understanding and inclusivity? Maybe you can read up on transgender issues, or have a respectful conversation with someone who sees things differently, or maybe just speak up when you hear someone saying hateful things. Every little bit helps, because we can create a world that's more just, more welcoming for everyone.